Now, if I said to you that today I was going to tell you a story about a couple of Swedish twin sisters, a few of you, especially the male viewers, might start to get a little bit excited. But you would be wrong to get excited, my friends, because this is a story like no other. A case of two twin sisters who not only committed mind-blowing acts of self-harm whilst putting others in the way of danger, but also a case of multiple missed opportunities by the UK police, which led to disastrous consequences. In today's podcast, we are going to delve deep into the story and the crimes of sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson. And in doing so, I need to warn you lot right now that this mysterious and horrific event that unfolded in front of our eyes is not for the faint-hearted. But if that sounds like your cup of tea, then strap yourself in, because we are about to go through one of the most shocking stories that has ever played out on British TV. One so shocking that it eventually even led to murder.
This video contains scenes and topics that some viewers may find upsetting. If you're affected in any way by the topics mentioned in this video and need help, contact Calm at thecalmzone.net.
Now, the viewers might not know this, right? But this was one of the first moments that me and you, we really struck up a bond, right? Because we were really close. But when we used to film the kickoff, afterwards, it was our ritual, wasn't it? We used to stay, we used to have some food, we used to have a few drinks, and we used to pretty much talk about everything but football after doing a football show, which almost sounds a bit like the podcast we used to do. Joey Knight podcast, great guest on that, Joey Knight. But we started talking, me, you and Brian, who these guys know as the True Geordie, we started talking about some true crime, like we always do, right? Yep. And I started telling this story that most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, when I tell this story, people don't know about it, right?
Yeah. And Brian didn't know about it, did he?
Brian didn't know about it. No. And it is about two Swedish sisters. And as soon as I start telling it, who interrupts?
I piped up immediately, because this is something that affected me so seriously, mate, that I think I have one of the Swedish sisters' face etched in my memory, that I think I actually do have nightmares still about this.
I think after today's episode, a lot of the viewers will have, and I know exactly who you're on about. You're on about Sabina.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. You're on about Sabina, because I have got that face and the actions of these two etched in my memory as well. Brian was mind blown when we told him the story, and these lot are going to absolutely love it. Should I say love it? I don't know.
You're going to find it fascinating.
You're going to find it fascinating. Yeah. But firstly, what I want to do is I want to set the scene right now, and there's no better man to do it than Mr. Aveste, so why don't you do that for us?
Imagine this, right? We're going to dissolve now. We're going to go into 2008. The place is Liverpool, England, which has just been voted, by the way, Europe's capital city of culture. Do you remember when that happened? An up-and-coming politician, Boris Johnson, has just won the London mayoral elections. He became a big thing after that, apparently. Construction also began on the Olympic Stadium in Stratford, and Olympic fever was obviously taking over after the Olympic Games in Beijing. Lewis Hamilton became the youngest ever F1 world champion, and during all of that, we had the soundtrack of Bass Hunter, Now You're Gone.
Terrific little song.
What a song that was. Now I could just imagine you singing that. Did you know all the words to that one?
I actually preferred, all I ever wanted was to see you smiling. Okay. Carry on, Josh.
It's all very jovial, but it's going to take a turn from here. But not until we've discussed Katy Perry was also in the charts.
Yeah.
With one of her favourite and most interesting songs of all time. What would you say that was?
Kissed a Girl and I Liked It?
Yes, and you certainly have kissed a few, and you certainly have liked it.
I've certainly not liked a few of them as well. Wouldn't have liked either of these two. Carry on.
The Dark Knight, mate, was released in 2008 during this time. It made $238 million in its first week, with Heath Ledger also being burned into my memory as one of the best portrayals of the Joker ever. Some might say he was a little bit crazy as well, potentially. But we'll get into craziness in a bit. We were all also playing GTA 4. Do you remember that game?
Oh, I remember it.
It was a good game.
I remember all the cheat codes. I could still probably list them out.
Yeah, triangle, square. Yeah. That was a good one, wasn't it, mate? That one. And the IT Crowd was on telly along with Gavin and Stacey, which is one of your favourite shows of all time, as well as Lost and Mad Men, which is a bit interesting considering what we're about to discuss. Little did we know, though, that during all of that time, something was being filmed in May in England that would have a significant impact in all of those that not only were there, that watched it on TV. And in fact, I remember watching this on like an old school TV with a VCR attached. That sort of puts you in the sort of the right motif of where we are right now. And this story would become one of the most talked about things in internet history. And that's why when we were sat around the kickoff table, that's why it's etched in our memories, you know? And so I thought we had to discuss it.
So back at this time, right, you had Big Brother, you had a whole load of reality TV shows and stuff like that, but you also had like cops with cameras, there was highway cops, there was traffic cops. I think this one in particular was motorway cops, and it was slightly before 24 hours in police custody and stuff like that. But either way, there was a lot of police reality TV shows at the time, right? And I remember watching this one, and there was multiple segments of the show that were included. There was a couple of asylum seekers picked up along the motorway. There were drunk drivers picked up along the motorway. But one of the first segments of this show was showing these two blonde-haired women that were walking along the dual carriageway, wasn't it, of the M6 Motorway. And they're being watched on the CCTV footage. And then all of a sudden, a horrific incident takes place that we had absolutely no answers during this point in the episode of Motorway Cops as to who, what, or why this incident had taken place. But before we speak about that, why don't you give me a bit of background on these two unknown women that were walking along?
The two women in question were called Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, and we're going to learn a lot more about these two very soon. They were twin sisters born in November 1967 and lived a very normal and innocuous life in a town called Sunne. By the early 2000s, Ursula had moved to the United States and Sabina was living in Ireland, and she had a husband and two kids.
Right, okay, so hold on, just quickly. Ursula is living where, sorry?
In America.
Sabina is living...
in Ireland.
Yet they're both in England at the time.
So don't jump the gun, Joey.
Right, okay.
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Let me explain it.
Okay.
So it was May 2008. Ursula flew over from the United States into Ireland to see Sabina. Now, the sort of circumstances around this are a little bit of a mystery. We don't know why the twins met up at this time. But what is interesting is that in the middle of the night, a couple of days after Ursula arrived in Ireland, they disappeared sort of quite unexpectedly. And they actually left at, I've read, about 2 a.m. Very unusual. And they boarded a ferry from Ireland straight to Liverpool. Now, the interesting thing about this, Joey, is they'd had no connection to England at that time when they made the trip across the border. So again, the circumstances around this are sort of still shrouded in mystery. Now, they arrived in England at 8:30 a.m. And when they did, again, this is so strange, the sisters walked into St Anne's police station in Liverpool and told officers that they were concerned for the safety of Sabina's children in Ireland.
Hold on, sorry, I know you told me I can't, but I've got to interject here.
Do it.
Why would they not go into a police station in Ireland that is closer to where the children in question are and where they already were? Because I think, do you know what I think? If I'm going to go and report a crime, I don't usually report many crimes, but if I'm going to go and report a crime, I would usually pop down to my local police station. I wouldn't plan a route via ferry to go to another one in Liverpool.
But also, why were they even doing it? Like, why would they do it and leave their children with someone that they suspected could cause the children harm? That's the key question,
I
isn't
tell you what is quite concerning for children.
Yeah.
Having a mum and an auntie that disappear at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. I'm quite sure the children would have been quite concerned.
Now, we're going to hear a lot about the children, perhaps at the end of this story, by the way, because they have been quite outspoken since the story of these two twins. But yeah, it was very unusual. Now, the police obviously had a duty of care towards these Swedish twins, even though the circumstances were fairly unusual. They contacted their counterparts in Dublin, and they had learnt that Sabina had had a fight with her husband the night before, but they weren't able to do anything more. Obviously, cross-border, they couldn't do very much. So the twins left the police station, obviously without any support, and they headed towards a National Express bus stop in Liverpool, and apparently they were headed towards London.
Right, so why were they heading to London, though?
To be fair, it's never been divulged. We don't have a clue why they were heading to London. In fact, some circumstances, people have said they weren't heading to London, so it's shrouded in mystery.
Okay, but what we know was, apparently, as the story goes, they're on a bus from Liverpool to London. What happens then?
So the bus driver, obviously they embark the bus for the first time.
Yep.
They're carrying a set of bags. And usually what happens in this scenario is you put your bags underneath the bus. And then you get on and crack on, right? So the bus driver's expecting that. The sisters refuse to do that. And it's really unusual to do that. They're gripping their bags on their chest in a way which the bus driver finds incredibly suspicious.
And at this time as well, it's not just the fact that they are not adhering to policy, it's also the fact that members of staff are noticing that they're acting quite erratic as well. Yeah. But at the same time, there is somewhat, maybe you might say, of a language barrier there. I actually think they spoke pretty well.
They spoke pretty well
in English from the footage we've seen, but definitely maybe a communication, a cultural barrier, something like that there. So they were given the benefit of the doubt, weren't they? And they were allowed onto the bus with their bags.
They were, but they didn't make it very far, mate. Basically, they go towards Kiel services, which is the next point in the story that we have to discuss.
Terrific
right?
little service station.
You've always rated it,
yeah.
and as M6 service stations go, it's a decent one.
Top 10.
Yeah. And you often frequent it. You were up and down that M6 all the time.
Yeah.
It's a big. Can we just say for anyone that's not in the UK, the M6 is not, as we said earlier on, a dual carriageway. It's a huge motorway. It's 3 lanes. In fact, it's probably one of the most arterial routes in the UK. The bus driver makes an unexpected stop. He never usually does this, and it wasn't for a fuel break or to have a break in general. He stops the bus because he is concerned about these Swedish sisters, as you say, because of their behaviour. So what he does is he gets out and speaks to one of his colleagues called Melissa, who was in the service station and basically helps him with the National Express routes, right? She calls up head office and goes, this is something really unusual. The driver is not happy with them. We basically want to refuse access to them to travel further. The bus driver effectively kicks them off the bus, right? So they take their bags, still clutched to their chests.
Thing is, for all he knows, by the way, like, if I'm that bus driver and they're acting erratic and they're clutching on the bags the whole journey, listen, call me paranoid. I'm thinking they might have a fucking bomb in there or something.
And actually, that is what he thought. And in fact, he had asked them politely to say, you're welcome back on the bus, but I need to search the bags. And they absolutely declined that right.
Okay.
Right? So now we're with Melissa. Melissa is looking after the two of them there and sort of keeping an eye on them because she's not quite sure what's going on. And also, they're kind of expecting to go on their forward journey. They're kind of expecting to catch another bus with another driver, right? Melissa thinks that their behaviour is so unusual, she actually does call the police. Right? So the police attend the Kiel services, they speak to the twins, and they seem to have a relatively cordial conversation. There wasn't anything suspicious that the police officers found, and so to be fair, mate, they just let them go.
Did the police search the bags?
The police didn't search the bags.
But that was the reason they got refused onto the bus.
They didn't have a sort of a probable cause, a reason to actually search the bags. There always has to be some criminal element to search someone.
No, there doesn't. I've been searched fucking hundreds of times.
Go on, then tell me what's the rule.
I've been searched hundreds of times in my life by police. They don't have to. Police make it up as they go. They don't have to. They don't have to fucking have anything. I'm telling you that now. What they can say is the reason we want to search your bags is because you have just been refused entry back onto a vehicle that is transporting people to London that you've paid for because you have refused to have your bags searched, and therefore I have suspicion that you could have potentially harmful weapons in that bag. I have suspicion you could potentially have drugs in that bag, a large amount of cash in that bag, anything like that.
Well, not only did that happen, mate, but the police were so happy with the conversation that they'd had. They gave them the number of the National Express coach service and said to them, call up head office, they'll be happy to rearrange another bus to come and pick you up. And so the police officers at that point were happy enough to leave the scene. At that point, everyone thought the women would catch the bus again and that would be the end of it. Melissa was still sort of weirded out by them, but there wasn't much she could really do. She'd call the police, and the police said there was nothing really to it.
So the old Bill go, and they're waiting to get on the next bus.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
But they never got on a bus, Joey. What happened next?
So this is where we, as the viewers at home, and I remember this avidly, sat at home watching it on one of my old-fashioned TVs, like you're saying there. This is where our experience with this case comes into play. You see these two Swedish twins, and they're walking down the middle.
The central reservation.
The central reservation.
So they had, by the way, just because again we'll show footage of this, but there were barriers on either side of them. You know, those metal barriers you see on every motorway. They're not very tall, so you know when you're looking at what was CCTV footage, by the way, and there's a big centre in Birmingham which looks after all of the road network and predominantly roads like the M6 because, as I say, it's such a serious and arterial route. And so the first footage that we saw on the motorway cops scene and the show wasn't footage from a cameraman, it was footage from CCTV. Now, the unusual part of this wasn't necessarily that they were just walking down the central reservation, Joey, was it? What happened, the first bit of footage that we saw in the show in Motorway Cops, can you remember?
Yeah, so in that first bit of footage, one of them runs straight out.
Can you remember who it was?
To traffic. It was Ursula.
It wasn't.
Was it Sabina?
Sabina was the first one to walk out. Now, the reason why we know this, by the way, is they were wearing quite distinctive clothing. Obviously, they're twins. Yep. They look really similar, by the way.
Yep.
One of them is wearing a bright red jacket, and that is Sabina. Ursula is wearing a lime green. Again, it's sort of full-length jackets, right? Yep. So they're quite easily distinct between each other. Sabina walks out in front of traffic. It was like a red Beamer, I think, off the top of my head. And the red Beamer hits Sabina, clips her, and then this is where the whole sort of cascade of events happen.
Isn't it about 56 miles per hour they were going when they were in the fast lane of the motorway. It could have been going 70. The cops with cameras, or the motorway cops, whatever they call it, they turn up on the scene and they are completely unaware as to what is going on, why the reason it's happened, and obviously they're thinking that it's going to be a fatal collision.
And by the way, they were highway patrol officers that had already sort of gone there to the scene, right? And highway patrol officers, for again, if you're not in the UK, they don't have any sort of like rights to arrest people or look after any criminal activity. The reason why they're there is to purely ensure the flow of traffic and to make sure that the roadways are safe. And so what had happened, mate, was that when this incident happened, the highway patrol was obviously one of the first people to the scene. They grab the women, they pull them over to the hard shoulder, and they're very compliant. They're talking to them on the hard shoulder. Now, as that had happened in Birmingham, the control centre had sent for the police. They obviously have to come and support the highway officers. So there's two police officers. It's a female officer, Cope, and a male officer, Finneson. They randomly happened to have this camera crew for Motorway Cops. It was just a cameraman, by the way, in the back of their car. In the show, in the documentary, you see the cameraman in the back of the screen because obviously you got the cameras watching the police officers. They're reacting to it going, someone has been hit in the fast lane of the motorway. They're going there expecting to see someone dead. But when they pull up, and then I'll let you explain this, but when they pull up, the two sisters are on the hard shoulder chatting with the highway patrol.
Yeah.
So it's really unusual.
And it seems very casual for someone that has just been hit by a car. And not only Sabina, who's been hit by a car, also for Ursula, who at the time is showing quite little concern for her sister. But maybe that is because despite having a high-speed collision between just herself and a car, at this time, there's no notable injury to Sabina. Now, Sabina's the one closest to the camera, Ursula's further away, and then all of a sudden, this happens. That is Ursula running headfirst into the traffic and being hit and dragged underneath a lorry, which instantly, am I right to assume, broke both of her legs?
Shattered her legs. The police said that they were completely obliterated. They say compound fractures, which means bone through skin.
Now, if you are those traffic cops right at that point, and what are their actual official...
Cope and Finlayson, they're like police constables.
They're police constables, right?
Yeah.
You are... in my head thinking, what the fuck is going on here? We've been called, is this a pat? What is going on here? So all of a sudden, then Sabina ends up running into the road as well, right? So now you've got two sisters, one of which is pretty much critically wounded. Yeah, she's actually not even able to get up off the floor. And one of them, Sabina, has now been hit by 2 cars and is still going strong.
Yeah.
She's still having a good old go at things, isn't she?
First of all, right, Ursula right now is on the middle of the road. Her legs are shattered. She is literally sort of dragging herself down the carriageway. One of the police officers, I believe it was Finlayson, goes and looks after her. Now, Sabina, after being hit by the car, was knocked unconscious. She was unconscious for 15 minutes, right? During this entire process, the cops do exactly the right thing. They call for air ambulance, they call for police support, senior officers, and they say over the radio, we think there's been 2 fatalities. That's the immediate reaction of the police officers. Now, the highway patrol are off there. They're trying to stop the road because obviously the road's a live carriageway.
So Sabina wakes up, basically. She comes round, right? And there's this really weird thing of all of a sudden, because I don't think she was, I mean, look, no one in their right mind runs out into traffic. However, from the conversations that they were having with the highway police earlier on, they didn't seem like it was, rather than their actions, it wasn't striking them as clear insanity. But when Sabina sort of comes around, she then starts screaming some really distressing and randomly concerning things.
It's okay, my love.
Then Sabina, like the Undertaker, manages to sit up, rise, jump up onto her feet, and despite PC Cope trying to restrain her, let's be honest, she puts her over like a sack of potatoes. She drops her, jumps over into the other side, the reverse lane of the traffic, and tries to do a runner until one of the police officers catches up with her, and actually is it a retired police officer? Off-duty police officer also helps jump in, and eventually they manage to restrain her. Now, the thing is, right, I've had friends that have been restrained by police, right? I can remember one of my friends being restrained by police.
Is this one of those ones where you're like, friends?
Friends. No. I'm actually on about one of my friends, right? He got restrained by police when we were younger, and he's 6'2", big set fella, whatever. And I remember it took a good 3-4 policemen to restrain him, yeah? They had to have about 5 of them restraining
It
Sabina.
was 6 people,
6
including
officers.
members of the public that had to help to restrain her.
And what did those members of the public and those police officers note about the physical ability of Sabina when they were trying to restrain her?
People use the terms superhuman strength to describe how she was able to fling people around.
Now, that's not the first supernatural occurrence here, really, is it? Because to be hit by 2 cars, to be out, and then to come back around, I would say, is pretty superhuman already. Then the strength that she displays when they're trying to restrain her is literally ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Eventually, senior police officers do turn up. They're on the case. They end up having to sedate her, right? They sedate her. They get her back in to an ambulance, and she is taken to the hospital, right? Now, Ursula has been airlifted to the hospital because she is in no fit state to be even put in the back of an ambulance. Sabina, whose obviously injuries are lessened, she was not the one that got hit by a lorry, although she did get hit by multiple moving vehicles. She has been driven to the hospital. Now, you would imagine after that ordeal, she's going to spend a fair chunk of time in hospital, wouldn't you?
Yeah, 100%. Not only just for her injuries, but maybe to check that she's well more
Medical
generally.
assessment, mental assessment, psychiatric assessment. How long was she in that hospital for, Josh?
She was in the hospital for 5 hours.
5 hours.
And they discharged her.
Shawshank Redemption's about 4 hours.
Yeah. And by the way, right, they had a psychiatrist look at her, they had a doctor look at her, and they had a nurse look at her. So all of these people involved had a good check of her, and they deemed her well enough, not only physically but mentally, to leave hospital in that time.
Well, here's the thing, right? Now, you talk about that, and the viewers will be sat here now and they'll be thinking, well, that's fucking mental. That is mental that a woman that has just run into the motorway twice, by the way, she's got a twin sister who's also done it, whose legs are now shattered to pieces, has been allowed to leave the hospital. But then when we go on to see the footage of her taken to the police station, because she's obviously driven straight from the hospital to the police station, you could actually... I don't think you're going to come to the defense of anyone, because I think that the inept ability to be able to see that there is a madness in this woman is seriously on show here by the UK police. But when she gets to the police station and we hear her talk and we see the footage of her and we even see footage like of her doing her hair, joking around with police officers, to say that she was almost playing possum in a way would be an understatement. She very much had the wool pulled over those officers' eyes in terms of where her sanity was at in that moment in time, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. And what's really weird about this is there's a police officer that was quite a common character in the Motorway Cops universe, right? And he was an older gent. I think he was sort of like 45 odd. And he was seen sort of chatting with her while in police custody. And he said the way that I dealt with Sabina was that I would flirt with her. And when I flirted with her, she became more docile and more easy to have a chat with. And so you could see there are moments in this story where you're just like, you're not doing the right things. Now, remember, both sisters said some pretty horrific stuff, not just on the highway, but also in police custody. Can you remember what Sabina said as she was being booked in to police custody? This is a very sort of like ghostly sort of turn of phrase.
We say always in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least once more follow.
So as you can see from that clip, that could well have been a hint being dropped by Sabina in terms of what her intentions were once she got out of police custody. But the most unusual thing for me wasn't what she said in that moment. It's what she didn't say. Because not at one point during police custody did she ask about the condition of her twin sister, Ursula, who she knows has just been dragged along the highway by a lorry and had her legs crushed. But after a couple of days, she is taken to court.
So yeah, the judge accused her of 2 crimes. 1, trespassing on the motorway, and 2, assaulting a police officer. She was found and pled guilty to both of those charges and sentenced to, get this, Joey, 1 day in prison.
Which had already been served because she'd already done a day and a half in custody.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, right, at this point, the first thing I want to know is, why are you here and why are you not back at home? The second thing I want to know is, I want a full and extensive psychiatric report on this woman. Was she given one?
She wasn't, not in police custody, no. And what is really damning is, as they were booking her in, not only did she say this sort of weird quote, as we've shown earlier on, they also asked her a very pertinent question. Have you ever hurt yourself in the past? Now, what the police officers that were assisting this process said is that she had no memory or recollection of the events that had just happened. And again, is that not weird in itself, that you don't come to terms with what actually happened? When she was asked the question, have you ever harmed yourself? She answered no.
No. And also, another thing that we should mention is they were checked over for drugs and alcohol in their system.
Only one of the sisters was. Ursula was the one that was tested because she had surgery on her legs, extensive surgery, and they blood tested her. Now, as you say, they looked at drugs, alcohol, they did a full survey. Mate, nothing came back.
Okay, so Ursula is now in hospital. Sabina has been let free and she's roaming the streets, pretty much. 2 men approach her and they basically get into conversation with her, and she tells them that she doesn't really know the area and she's looking for her sister who is in hospital. At this moment in time, when these men have approached her and they've spoke to her, she hasn't mentioned the fact that her sister is in hospital because of an incident where they were running out in front of cars on the highway.
No.
This woman, who may or may not be insane, has been sane enough to not mention that to those men, and those 2 men have invited her in to their home. Now, those 2 men's names were?
They were Glenn Hollingshead and Peter Malloy. So Glenn apparently was a very sort of kind and welcoming gentleman. Peter Malloy spoke afterwards as saying he was a stand-up citizen, and this wasn't out of his character to always lend someone a hand. Sabina had asked these 2 for some assistance to find a bed and breakfast because obviously she had nothing, nowhere to stay. Now, again, even just seeing her in the street should have raised some concerns, right? She's walking down the street with a plastic bag in her hand. She's looking uneasy, sort of unsure, and yet these 2 blokes, mainly because of Glenn's kindness, welcome her back into Glenn's home.
Would you have took her into your home?
I personally wouldn't. I think you could tell that she was sketchy, even from the police interviews.
I personally would not be offering her shelter.
No.
I know it sounds out of order, but not my problem. You sound and look like a crackhead to me. If you're not a crackhead, you sound like a nutter. I'm not letting you in. But at the same time, maybe I am a lot less compassionate than other people.
Well, look, mate, you're a Londoner. You know,
Yep.
we're not up in the north right now. Maybe people are just kinder up there.
People are kinder up there. They are. I know that for a fact, right? But they let her in. They go back there that night. They have a couple of drinks. She pops out. I think she gets some cigarettes. Now, there's a concerning incident that was noted, right? So she offers the two men cigarettes, right?
She'd been smoking them all night.
She'd been smoking them all night.
So, you know, she just said, do you want some? And the lads said, yeah, obliged.
They both say yeah. They both put them in their mouth. As they're about to light them up, Sabina runs over, takes the cigarettes out of their mouth and says, don't, they could be poison. Now, let me ask you a question, mate. At this point, are you chucking this fucking bird
running.
out?
I'm leaving my own house.
I'm leaving the own
running.
house.
I'm running.
Yeah.
I'm running. And not only was that, mate, she was also looking and fidgeting around the curtains, looking up and down the street. There were a lot of moments in this where Peter Malloy afterwards says, that wasn't quite right. And in fact, Peter Malloy, left the house as quickly as he could.
But let's play devil's advocate here, right? This girl, and if you are a kind, caring gentleman, right, like the gentleman that let her into her house, what you're probably thinking is this girl is a victim of domestic abuse. And she has been so badly abused that she is in a sort of hyperactive state of paranoia. She's looking out the curtain to see if her abuser might come back, and therefore let me offer her shelter and let's get her to her sister and get her sorted. He was a kind-hearted soul. He was a good citizen. Now she stays that night. And the next day, they actually spend the whole day. They're calling around the hospitals. They're helping. She is by no means actually acting as quirky as she was the night before. And bearing in mind, they admit to consuming alcohol the night before and whatnot. Maybe it's just a side of her that comes out. She'd had a long day. She was a little bit drunk. Because the next day, by all means, she's acting a lot more normal. To the point where it gets to the sort of evening. They're about to cook dinner. And is it Hollingshead?
Yeah, Glenn Hollingshead goes out and speaks to his neighbour, Frank. And he asks him, can I have a few tea bags? Frank's washing his car at this point. And so, yes, says, as soon as I'm done washing the car, I'll come and drop over the tea bags for you.
Yeah. Hollingshead goes back in to his house. And before Frank can drop over the tea bags, Hollingshead comes back out of his house.
Yeah.
And he is shouting, she stabbed me. Sabina has apparently stabbed him multiple times.
4 times.
4 times. And unfortunately, God rest his soul, Glenn Hollingshead died in that moment. I think he was pronounced dead by the time that police arrived on the scene.
He was, like, Frank saw him pass away. And bless him, Glenn had asked Frank to look after his dog.
Yeah.
You know.
What happens in the meantime with Sabina? Is she still in the house?
No, Sabina flees the scene straight away. Now, the reason why we know that is paramedics were obviously called and immediately attend the scene. Now, they're coming down the street, they're aggressively driving to get there to try and save Glenn's life, and they were obviously unable to do so. But as they do, they find Sabina walking down the street alongside a motorist who has tried to wrestle her, hitting herself over the head with a hammer.
And the motorist himself, right, said that the reason he left his car and tried to restrain her is because she was almost doing the lamppost sprints that I used to do when I was out running, right? She'd run for a second, she'd stop, couple of smashes to the head with a hammer, and then she would carry on running in between. He saw her doing this multiple times, right? And then when he got out and tried to restrain her, she actually sliced at him with, I think it was a roof tile.
She hit him over the back of the head with roof tile, so he stumbles away and he was unable to keep hold of her, basically. But it doesn't just stop there.
What happens next?
Neither the paramedics nor Josh, who's the motorist, not me.
No.
Just to let you know.
Thank God.
Yeah. Neither of them could subdue Sabina for long. So what they do is they follow her. The paramedics follow her, and they get to a bridge which is 30 feet high, 10 meters above the ground. Right. Sabina is there on the edge of the bridge. She jumps immediately from it. She breaks both of her ankles and she fractures her skull. But mate, she's still alive.
This woman has got to be fucking superhuman. Because to be able to survive everything that she has survived in the past, 74 hours or something like that, is literally phenomenal, by the way, completely mental. So it's at this point that she finally gets arrested and detained by police, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously she's arrested on the charge of murder because Frank is obviously attributed to what Glenn had said. And so they arrest her on suspicion of murder. So Sabina obviously is in hospital for a significant period of time. She gets let out in September of 2009. She was then sent directly to the trial in which the judge had to analyse whether she was insane at the time in which she conducted the killing. During the entire trial, she pleads no comment. She says absolutely nothing. There's no remorse. She doesn't answer any questions at all. She doesn't acknowledge any of the incidents that had happened previously. Now, the judge has a very clear thing that he has to do. He has to listen to two forensic psychologists, one working for the defence and one working against Sabina. Now, both of those psychologists understand and admitted that she wasn't now insane, but they did say the verdict that she was insane at the time of the killing.
Right, and that leads to what sentence?
So this is a very rare case, mate. Like this doesn't really happen. It's sort of like a deeming of a puff of madness almost is what it's described as, right? And because of that, the judge has to say that she had diminished responsibility at the time of the killing. And what he's then unable to do is charge her of murder. So the next cause down beyond that is manslaughter, which has a lot sort of leaner sentencing terms.
And it's manslaughter due to the fact that she is deemed as insane, yeah?
Yeah, she's deemed insane, but the key thing is she was not deemed insane at the time of the trial.
I am calling bullshit on that. This woman was not insane. Her actions were insane, but she was sane enough to get police in custody wrapped around her finger. She was sane enough to befriend these two men that invited them into one of their homes, and she was sane enough to fool multiple people on multiple occasions. We all saw the clips of her on camera. She was sane enough to flirt with the police officer, like we say, right? This woman had a certain amount of connivingness, if that's even a word, about her, didn't she?
She absolutely did. And in fact, the actual term that the judge used was induced delusional disorder, which basically means that two people make themselves mad together.
Now, this is the part I find hard about this, right? I completely understand it. Listen, if me and you are away together, right, and I'm depressed, I can get that I could pass on my behaviour, my actions, the way I am around you and whatnot. I completely understand that I could pass on maybe a bit of that depression to you. What I find very, very hard to believe is that two sisters that are living hundreds of thousands of miles away from each other are able to meet up and within a day pass on this psychotic state and frenzy to each other and then go on this sort of rampage. Now, here's the other problem I've got with it, right? The two charges that she was charged with were what?
Trespassing on the motorway and assaulting a police officer.
Right, okay. So where is the justice for the victims? When we're talking about sanity here, yeah? Where's the justice for the victims who were the ones whose car she collided with? So if I'm driving along, yeah, if I'm driving along and a woman jumps out in front of my car, do you know what, mate? I'm probably never going to want to fucking drive on a motorway again.
Yeah, 100%.
Even worse, I might have slammed on the brakes to get out the way of that woman and therefore caused myself serious harm. I might have had a child in the car. I might have given them serious harm. PTSD is a serious thing. Now, that lorry driver that dragged her underneath, that won't be his choice of vehicle. That will be his work, that lorry driver. How does he then go on and live his life and go back to work? There's so many things here that just are mental, that she was just charged with those two things, and albeit those two things, she wasn't even given the proper charges, because that woman should have been charged with murder and had the book thrown at her, shouldn't she?
It gets worse, mate. The charge of manslaughter, the sentence that the judge deemed was only 5 years.
Right.
She was remanded in prison for that period of time. Now, the judge in his closing statement said that this amount of time would never make up for the hurt and the pain and the value of Glenn Hollingshead's life. He said his hands were tied. That's the only sentence that he could give her. But 5 years, mate, it's the ultimate injustice of this case. It feels so... It doesn't feel good enough, does it?
And in terms of Ursula, the sister, right? She got out of hospital, I think, after about 9 months with crushed
Exactly
legs.
the same time as the trial. So in September of 2009, she was released.
And what was she charged with?
She was charged with absolutely nothing. She went through no police interrogation at all.
So again, she jumped in front of that lorry driver's car, inflicted the mental damage, PTSD, traumatic ordeal upon him in doing so, and she was charged with absolutely nothing, and she returned to the United States. Once serving out her sentence, Sabina was released. And do we know what happened to Sabina after that?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, by the way. She only served 2.5 years in prison.
Yep.
So she didn't even serve the full sentence, which is also just, I can't wrap my head around. She went straight back to Ireland and, by all accounts, lived a very secretive but normal life since.
And the main thing, before we get into where are they now, what are they up to now and whatnot, the main thing people are going to want to know here is, why did they do it? Why did they do it? Because it was described as a moment of madness, shared psychosis, or whatever it is. But you and me both know there's got to be something going on here. And as well, this is in the year 2008, right? Yeah. So it's not like this is in the fucking 1900s and there's no smartphones, there's no emails, there's no way of tracking what people are up to. I mean, you got at this exact time, in fact, years before, you got Chris Hansen tracking down predators, every day.
Well, what did you think? Like when you watched the show? Because I'll tell you what I thought. I thought it was drugs.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like that, maybe untraceable stuff, but stuff that it was experimental or they did something that wasn't in their bloodstream.
I may or may not know from personal experience that mushrooms can't be traced in your system.
Okay.
Magic mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
However, you'd need.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a closed cut mushroom, was it?
No, you'd need a lot of those magic mushrooms in your system to make you want to do something like that. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, mate. I've got no fucking idea. I've got no idea. What I would like to know was what were in the bags.
Well, do you not know what were in the bags?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, they found a laptop. They found loads of phones. They found one passport for the women, but not for the other one. And that's pretty much it. It was just full of clothes.
So what did the laptops have them on, though? Surely they examined the laptops and they would have looked...
What about the phones? I mean, to have a series of phones in your bag is a bit strange in itself, isn't it?
And there were no drugs found?
No drugs, no paraphernalia, nothing to do with drugs.
Because having a load of phones to me says, well, you a drug mule. Were you drug muling? But then at the same time, this woman's not fucking Walter White. She's been living with a family and 2 kids. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just weird for her to even be doing that. But
and look, the cops immediately thought, and they say this in the documentary, they say these 2 must be on drugs just because of their power and their inability to feel pain. And so for me, that was like the ultimate sort of answer to this. But then when you do see the blood test, Ursula was blood tested, absolutely nothing in their system, mate. So magic mushrooms perhaps is the only thing, but maybe there's something more sinister going on.
So my only other thing I could suggest would maybe be a pack. And maybe they had this pact and it was from, childhood trauma that they'd had together or something like that. And they decided that they were going to meet up and they were going to kill themselves. However, what that doesn't really... Look, there's a lot of sanity amongst insanity. And that's the thing that I find it hard to get, yeah? You cannot really be that level of insane and book a flight over from America to Ireland. You cannot be that level of insane and sneak out a house at 2 a.m. and then go down to a port and get a ferry. You cannot be that level of insane to do so many of the tasks that they did while they carried out this series of events. And that for me is why, I don't know, like people will disagree with me in the comments. I don't buy the insanity thing.
I don't believe the suicide pact thing purely because as a parent, I can't understand someone wanting to do that.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Like she has 2 kids, and in fact, one of her sons speaks out very sort of strongly to anyone that will heed his message and says, "No, my mum Sabina completely normal woman now, looks after me, was a brilliant mother, cares about me deeply. And so there's something from that perspective that doesn't quite add up. But to be honest with you, mate, there are so many conspiracy theories around this story about why they did it. Were they insane? Were they always insane? What was going on at the time of the incident? Like, you could go on. Like, I've read pages and pages of articles about this. There's so many other explanations, which we can go through, to be fair.
Yep.
So one of them is, it's got this really weird name. I'd never heard of this conspiracy theory, so I'd be interested to see if you've heard of it. It's this substance and this sort of experiment called MK Ultra.
Never heard of it.
Apparently,
sounds good though. I'd like some.
Yeah, well, maybe you wouldn't after you heard what it's like. So the CIA apparently were conducting some experiments in the United States in the 50s and like all the way up to the 70s, and they were conducting these experiments on people like twins, and they were seeing how different effects of drugs or psychological abuse would affect individuals. And what a lot of people online are saying is that these women could have been part of something like that, because there are code words within this sort of like this world, which is almost like a self-destruct mode. Like, you know, information, we're gonna impart this sort of like psychological switch, and at that moment you're gonna then sort of like go through these sort of self-destructive acts. So when I started reading that, some of it made sense, but also like you're going down a weird hole then, aren't you? Do you know what I mean?
But then the fact that they were shouting stuff like they want your organs and stuff like that.
Now we've not really talked about this, but there are several things that Ursula said which pay heedance to this sort of conspiracy theory. They say they're going to take your organs. That's what Ursula said, first of all. She also said something which is very haunting to me. She said, I know that you're not real, and I know you're going to hurt me. That was something that etched in my memory for a long time. She also said, why are you filming me? And when the police, she was asking for police several times.
She was asking for police once they had told her a thousand times that they were the police.
And then she said, I need a doctor, not the police, which is just like, that sounds logical, but also you were screaming for the police officers a minute ago. So there's some
there
stuff.
is basically a theory that they were lab rats.
Yes.
More or less.
There is. And with what she was saying, that corroborates that kind of story, that they were scared about organs being stolen and the police being part of the state which controlled them. So yeah, mate, that's when you get down that rabbit hole, it's a lot more concerning than even the story of what actually happened.
And the fact that Sabina ran in front of two cars, she hit herself multiple times in the head with a hammer, she jumped off of a bridge, that is to me multiple suicide attempts, and was able to make it through. And that's probably where a lot of the conspiracy theories come from, because no one should have that sort of strength. People don't get that lucky, you know, to be in situations half as dangerous as that and make it out of their lives.
The police officer at the scene, Finlayson, immediately said and thought that Ursula was dead. You saw the footage. She gets dragged under an articulated vehicle that was probably going north of 50, 60 miles an hour. I'm sure the police officers would say there were not many circumstances in which a vehicle hits a person and survives. And so there is this thing about like immortality and them being unable to be killed, which is just like spooky.
Well, we do know that they're both still alive now. The presence, the whereabouts of Sabina is currently unknown. It is suspected that she's in Scandinavia somewhere. I don't know. You said about her son, speaking about the fact she was a brilliant mother. Her son hasn't revealed whether that he lives with her or anything like that, has he?
No, but he's a grown man now, so probably not.
As for Ursula, I did a little bit of digging.
You're very good at this.
I am
forensic sort of searching. How did you do it?
I found out the area that she lived in, and there was a article, right? And the whole article was in another language. So the first thing I've done is I've gone on Google Translate and I've gone Swedish to English, right? Swedish sisters, I'm thinking the article's Swedish. Nothing's come up. So then I found out a website that basically you can put a language, you can put text in, and it will work out what language that is for you. I went on that. It turned out that it was from a Brazilian website and it was Portuguese, right? Which is obviously their sort of native tongue over there. And in this article, it's saying something about the fact that there is a certain church that I won't name, and that this church had recently held a I don't know what you'd even call it. I'm not really religious. It's a sort of ritual of sort of Christianity, I believe, where you are forgiven for your sins and you're cleansed and stuff like this. And this was for an Ursula Eriksson. And in this photo here that you can see on screen now was actually linked from the church underneath the post where they just speak about the fact that they carried out this, what would you even call this?
Not like a baptism of sorts, I suppose.
Almost like a baptism, a christening or something like that, a cleansing of the soul where you dedicate yourself to religion and whatnot. Now, I have absolutely no idea if the churchgoers and the church members that were in attendance for that or that conducted that realised exactly the soul that they were cleansing or the history of the woman whose soul they were cleansing in this. But I found that really, really interesting. And just again, once I flash this picture up, what we will disclaim is we don't know whether, listen, this could be another Ursula Eriksson living in the area. It's up to you to determine who Ursula is in this picture. I'm pretty sure that you'll have a strong idea from watching the documentary and then looking at it, but that is the only known whereabouts that I found that could, and I say could, allude to where Ursula is now. Sabina, on the other hand, it is still a mystery if she's still out there. But can I ask you one sort of question to finish this off, Josh?
Yes. Please.
Do you feel like if Sabina is out there right now, bearing in mind we're coming up to 20 years on now from this event, we're over 15 years on, right? Do you feel like you would feel safe if you found out that this woman was living in your neighbourhood?
100% not. And to be honest with you, mate, it shows the failings of the British sort of criminal system, doesn't it? The fact that Sabina and Ursula went through the hospitals, then went through the police sort of interrogations and system as well several times, and they were let out and allowed back into society is something which really is the ultimate story of this case. The story is that really Britain failed these, not only these women, but also, you know, everyone around them. Glenn Hollingshead, you know, is no longer with us because of basically police ineptitude, let alone the judges' ineptitude, let alone these criminal psychologists that were looking at the women and deemed Sabina to be sane at the time.
And as far as we know, the neither woman has reoffended at any point since, to our knowledge that we know. But yeah, to say that the UK police, the custody system, and everyone involved really has blood on their hands would be a bit of an understatement.
And what they say as well is these things, it's, as I say, it's called like a puff of madness.
Yeah.
In some people, it happens once and they live very normal lives, but there are cases in which it happens again. And based on what Sabina said in police custody, you'd be pretty concerned about it happening again, wouldn't you?
Never rule it out happening again. Now listen, people, we are definitely going to be covering more true crime cases on this channel. This is the first one we thought to do, but we've got many more. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please do us a massive favour. We are building the channel. This is just our second episode, isn't it, Josh? Going out. It's really exciting for us because obviously we're branching out into a new style of content. We're trying really hard. So please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you smash a like on this video. And right now, it's really important you do this. Hit the bell so that you get a notification every time one of our videos goes live, because there will be weekly uploads. We will be covering true crime, but we'll be covering all sorts, pop culture, nostalgia, everything going on. So there's so much exciting stuff to come from the Joey than the Josh podcast.
Tell your friends about it. We want to get as many people in here as we can, because quite frankly, we've sort of tackled a serious topic today. Yeah. But we're going to have a bit of fun with some of these.
We've got some exciting shit coming up. Let's leave it at that. We'll see you all in the next one.